Welcome back to Cinematic Music Production Tips. Stem limiting, or applying mix bus limiting to individual stems, is useful when you need to deliver your music in separate stems or instrument groups in addition to a full mix. And you want those stems to sound exactly the same as your full mix when they're being played back together. This technique can also be used with other plugins beside a limiter. Essentially any plugin that has a sidechain input could be used this way. The problem we're trying to address is simple. Let's say there's a limiter on your mix bus, but you need to export a number of separate stems. If you solo each stem and export them one at a time, the limiter on the mix bus is no longer hearing the rest of the mix, only the solo track, and therefore it applies less limiting. If you later combine these separately exported stems, you will most likely end up with music that's much louder than your full mix export, and potentially clipping. Alternatively, copying an instance of the limiter plugin to each stem will also give pretty similar results, where the limiters are not aware of other material in other stems. I've put together a quick example demonstrating how to apply mix bus limiting to each of your stems and how to export them all simultaneously. We've got 7 tracks here, 2 tracks of percussion, 2 tracks of brass, and 3 tracks of strings. These 7 tracks output to group tracks, percussion, brass, and strings. These groups have the same division of instruments as the stems that we want to export later. Any additional processing that you want on specific stems can happen at this stage. For example, here I've added an EQ just to the string group. The signal from these group tracks needs to get to 2 different destinations. First, another group track, which is the sum of all the unlimited group tracks. I've called this track sidechain mix. And second, we want the group tracks to output to stem tracks. These stem tracks are what we will later use to make exports. The stem tracks all output to another track. This is our full mix. I'll open up the mixer page and show you how the signal routing works. First, we need to send from each of the group tracks to the sidechain track. It's very important to make sure that the sidechain mix track has its output disabled, so set this to no bus. Otherwise you will double your signal and hear it twice. The group tracks will have their outputs set to corresponding stem tracks. Percussion group going to the percussion stem, brass to brass, and strings to strings. On these stem tracks is where we will place our limiters, 1 per stem. I like to use FabFilter Pro L2. There are a few other sidechain limiters out there, but FabFilter is my favorite. Make sure you use the VST3 version to have access to the sidechain feature. Next we need to enable the sidechain and to switch the limiters to sidechain triggering. If you're aiming to keep any latency introduced by the limiter as low as possible, then make sure that true peak limiting is turned off, and switch the limiter algorithm to transparent. Finally, I'm going to set an output level ceiling of -0.1 dB, and then I'm going to copy this limiter with these settings over to all of the other stems. The final step is to feed each of these limiters from our sidechain mix channel. To do that, we set up a send per limiter. The target is the sidechain input of each of the limiters. Let's open up the limiters and see them in action. As you can see, they're all applying the same amount of limiting to each stem, regardless of whether there is any signal reaching the limiter threshold in that specific stem or not. And the full mix is staying nicely under 0.1 dB. Finally, let's make some exports of the stems and the full mix. Simply select Audio Mixdown, export multiple channels, tick all the stem channels and the mix channel, and hit Export. And here are your exports, all of the individual stems and the full mix. That's all for this time. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.